Hello, everybody. Doing another quick surprise live, and I might actually be doing more of these because I like the new feature that Instagram has just put out or just added, where you can do a live and you can save it permanently as a post on IGTV. I think that's brilliant, absolutely brilliant. So this post or this live is going to be answering a question that I've been getting a lot, especially in the last 1 month, and it's people just asking about my story, my journey, how I learned English, despite not being a native, despite not growing up in an English-speaking country where there are native speakers all around me. So people want to know what my story is, and today, I'm going to share that with you guys for the first time ever on video. And not only is it going to be on video, it's also going to be live for those of you who are watching this live. Hey, what's happening? Pourrier, great to have you in the live with us. Thank you for joining. Hi, Preeti, how you doing? And let's get started while everyone's getting in. If you guys are late, you can watch the recording. All right, so here's my story, right? How did I learn to speak English the way I do? Well, to give you a bit of background first, what am I, and why do I always say that I'm not a native, but that English is my first language? Because English is my first language. It is my strongest language. I speak 4 languages in total, and the first one is Tamil, which is my mother tongue. I grew up speaking that at home with my parents, with my family. The second language that I know is Malay. Now, to be completely honest, I'm a bit rusty with my Malay. Rusty meaning I've lost some of my proficiency because I haven't used it for many years. But I do still understand Malay just as well as I always did. When it comes to speaking, what tends to happen is when I start speaking Malay, I end up saying things in Japanese instead. And it's just because I haven't used it in a very long time. So there's Malay, and Malay is the national language of the country where I was born. I was born and raised in Brunei. Brunei is a tiny country in Southeast Asia next to Malaysia. And the national language there is the national language there is Malay. And it's very similar to Bahasa Indonesia, which is the kind of the most prominent language used in Indonesia, and it's very similar to Bahasa Melayu, which is what is spoken in Malaysia. So that's the other language that I speak. And then there's English, because I went to an English medium school, or all of my education was in the English medium, so my subjects at school were taught to us in English. And then the fourth language that I speak is Japanese, because I now live in Japan, my wife is Japanese, and I work at a Japanese company. So I actually use Japanese more than I use any other language right now. I use more Japanese than I use English. In fact, the only time that I use English, because I don't speak to my wife in English, I speak to her in Japanese. The only time that I really get to speak English is when I'm doing these lives or when I make videos for you guys. So, yeah, right now, nowadays, or at least for the last 1 year, I've been speaking more Japanese than anything else. So those are the 4 languages that I speak. And here's the interesting thing. So my citizenship, I'm Indian. My parents are both from India. I was not born in India, which is fine, but I still grew up speaking Tamil at home. So with Tamil, obviously I learned it because I was speaking it every day at home with my family. Malay, I learned it obviously because I was speaking it every day with the other kids that used to live in my neighborhood. We'd go outside and ride our bicycles, play football almost every single day. And there were some kids in my neighborhood who couldn't speak English. And so while some of the kids could speak English and others couldn't, our default language would be Malay, because that was the language that everybody could understand. And then at school, although I was going to an English medium school where English was the language we used most, I didn't have the opportunity to speak to native speakers. Everybody around me at school were non-natives. English was a second language for everyone. Even for my teachers, English was a second language for them. For my classmates were from all over the world, but not from native English-speaking countries until I got to like upper secondary when I started going to an international school. But even, before that, when I was just going to a regular school, I had friends who were Malaysian Chinese. I had friends who were Malay, Bruneian Malay. And then I had like Indian friends. I had friends of mine who were from Pakistan, Sri Lanka, various parts of Asia. But none of them were native English speakers. So what that meant is that they all had accents and they all used funny grammar. So I was not learning from natives. Here's the interesting thing. Out of the 4 languages I speak, English is my strongest. And when you think about how I learned it, you guys are always complaining, saying that, oh, I don't have native speakers to practice with, so I can't speak fluently. I call bullshit on that. That is a rubbish excuse because, listen, I learned Malay by speaking to native speakers. Yes, I'll grant you that. I learned Tamil by speaking with native speakers who are my family. I'll grant you that. I learned Japanese by speaking with native speakers. I'll grant you that because my wife is Japanese. Okay, fine. I did not learn English by speaking with native speakers. And English is the strongest language that I speak. I speak better English than I speak anything else. And that's the one language where I did not learn it by practicing with native speakers. So the whole native speaker, I guess, what's it called? The native speaker obsession is nonsensical. At best, it's nonsensical. So the 2 things that really helped, obviously, the fact that I was using English every day when talking to my friends, that definitely played a role. It meant that I had tons and tons of practice, right? So if you think about it, I'm now 32 years old. I started going to school when I was 3-4 years old. So right now I have like 28-ish years of experience speaking English every single day, almost. So obviously I'm going to be pretty good at it because I've been doing it for 28 years. But when I took the IELTS test, I was about 17 years old. But even then, I had years and years and years of practice. So it's no mystery that I was able to speak English well. But my classmates who grew up in Brunei, who also went to English medium schools, who are also non-natives, they don't speak the way I do. Many of them do still have accents. Many of them do still use weird grammar. And there was one difference between me and them. And the difference was this. With a lot of us as adult learners, or a lot of us who learn new languages, we learn the new language by holding on to our native language as the base. It's almost like if you imagine that your native language is like a set of goggles. When you're learning the new language, you have the tendency of putting on these goggles of your native language, and you see the new language only through the lens of your own native language. You're only able to make sense of expressions and words in the way that your native language is, in the way that your native language expresses them. So I'll give you an example, right? For example, in English, we often say, I had breakfast. To have breakfast, right? It means to eat and to drink. And that's a very common, natural way that we use the language. English has its unique character where we use the word have to talk about eating and drinking. But that's not the same in other languages. You might not say, in Malay, for example, you might not say, saya ada, I don't know, roti or something like that, right? Saya ada roti or something like that, which means like I had bread or I have bread. It makes no sense whatsoever. So if a Malay speaker is only looking at English in terms of their native language, that expression, I had breakfast or I had bread for breakfast, makes no sense whatsoever, because when they translate it word for word into their native language, it doesn't make sense. So that's the first aspect, right? That we're looking at it. Now if that actually extends even further with pronunciation and accents. Every language is unique and it has its own set of sounds. And those sounds are going to be unique just to that language. Some of those sounds might be the same or very similar to sounds in another language. But what a lot of learners do is, instead of learning to move their mouth and use their articulation system to produce the sounds of the new language, which is English, they instead will use only sounds from their native language which are close or similar to the English sound. So for example, somebody who has, let's say, actually let's use Tamil because I am Tamil, right? So in Tamil, there is no F sound and there's also no W sound. So when a Tamil speaker looks at a word like water, which has a W in it, and there is no W sound in Tamil, what they might tend to do is use a Tamil sound which is closest to the W sound, and that would be the V sound. And so instead of saying water, they say vater, right? And that's not how it's pronounced. Russian speakers do that too, so do Germans. They don't say what, they say vot, right? So that's where an unnatural accent comes from, and that's where, I guess, an accent which is actually bad in the sense that it makes you harder to be understood comes from. You're using sounds in your native language to speak a new language. You're not supposed to do that. Instead, what you should be doing is you should be learning to move your mouth to produce those sounds in the new language. Richie is sharing that Hungarians can't pronounce the TH. Similarly, that's a similar problem for people from other countries as well, with other native languages. They pronounce the TH like an S, rather than they say S. Exactly. Instead of saying thank, they say sank, right? Instead of saying thank you, it's sank you, and that's not how it's pronounced. Hey Cheyenne, how you doing, man? So accents are not in and of themselves bad. It's okay to have an accent, but it is bad if you're pronouncing words with sounds that are different to what you're actually supposed to use. If the word sounds like a different word and it makes you hard to understand, then that's a problem that you need to address. The other mistake that people make is when it comes to producing sounds that are very similar, they produce it in the way that it's produced in their native language. I'll give you another example. Like the word tango, it starts with a T and the T is pronounced T, right? Like it's the tongue is towards the front of your mouth and it's touching the tongue goes up in the corner between your upper teeth and the roof of your mouth, T, right? That's how you pronounce the English T sound. But what a lot of Tamil speakers might do is they would pronounce it like tango instead of tango. When you say tango, what a Tamil person is doing is the Tamil T sound is produced by putting the tongue up further back and touching it to the kind of the middle or the back of the roof of the mouth. And so what that means is your tongue, your mouth is in a different position to the English T sound. And because your mouth and your tongue is in a different position, the sound that you produce is also going to be different, obviously, right? And that's a mistake they make. And the reason why they make that mistake is because they never actually learn how to produce the English T sound. Instead, they're making the Tamil T sound whenever they speak English. Okay, so here's the solution, and we'll get to that. The solution is this. When you learn a new language, and especially when it comes to pronunciation, you want to be learning it by listening rather than by transliterating. Transliterating means when you look at a word, let's say it's an English word, let's say it's the word tango, what you're doing is you're looking at the words, the letters T-A-N-G-O, and in your mind, you're converting them into T-A-N-G-O sounds in your native language. And if you're a Tamil speaker, you're going to do that in your mind, and what you end up doing is just producing like the Tamil the Tamil spelling of tango, right? Tango, right? Or tango. And instead of doing that, what you should be doing with learning pronunciation is doing what children do. One of the reasons why children are able to pick up accents or natural accents a lot easier is because they're not transliterating. And it's because a lot of kids aren't that comfortable with reading just yet. Instead, kids are still curious and exploring, and what they do is they learn languages by listening, not by reading. So when they learn new words, it's not because they're reading a word from a book or from a list, and then they're now sounding out the letters. Children learn by just hearing words and mimicking. And what that means is when you hear the sentence, what did you do? Which is pronounced, what did you do in common speech, rather than what did you do, which is how it's written. Kids just listen to the what did you do, and that entire chunk, that sound is what they're internalizing and learning. They're not actually learning the separate words, what did you do? It's what did you do as one big chunk. That sound communicates this particular message. And it's the same even with individual sounds. They're not kind of looking at the word tango and then, sounding it off in sounds that they already know. They're listening for how this word is pronounced, and they're trying to reproduce that. I was doing that unintentionally. I think as a kid, I was really just obsessed with video games and cartoons and movies and music. And all I was doing as a child, without realizing, I was just trying to mimic my heroes in the video games I was playing, in the cartoons and TV shows I was watching, and that's it. So I was doing that subconsciously, but I ended up doing that with all the languages that I learned. And I have never, ever caught myself translating in my head. When I speak English, I sound like I do. When I speak Tamil, you can watch the video that I posted, which was purely in Tamil. I was speaking in Tamil. When I speak in Japanese, you can check out my TikTok post. That's how I sound when I speak Japanese. And when I speak Malay, I posted a Malay video on Twitter, actually. So you can listen to how I sound. I mean, granted, I don't sound like a native Malay speaker. Granted, I don't sound like I was born and raised in India. Granted, I don't sound like a Japanese person 100%. But a lot of people who've heard me will say that I'm pretty damn close. And again, even when it comes to English, I actually don't even sound 100% American anyway. So, hey, but it's close enough that a lot of you guys are saying, hey, are you American? I'm not. And I don't actually sound 100% American either. An actual American person from the Midwest or who's familiar with accents would say that there are a few things that I don't pronounce the American way. So there you go. That's my story. That's how I learned English. That's how I learned languages. And now you know. All right. Hope you guys have a wonderful evening. Thank you for joining me. I got to get back to work and continue building courses for you guys. And love yous. Mwah.